Anytime it. Good evening, everybody. Welcome once again to the Lepanto Institute's Anchor Team. I'm your host, Michael Hitchborn, and with me tonight is a new friend, somebody that I've met twice now at two different conferences that I've been to. We've had a fantastic conversation at both conferences. I've gotten to know Paul List very well. I'm going to ask you about your last name, by the way.
Okay.
I've gotten to know Paul quite well. He's just a marvelous intellect, self-educated man, and a wonder to behold. He is the author of Dianetics, Mount Doom.
Wow, I had to spring that one on me.
The subhead to that is The Prophecy of Tolkien Revealed. And we're going to be talking about that tonight. But of course, before we get into any of that, we're going to begin with our prayer. In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus nunc et in ordo. Oh, you pulled this on me. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus nunc et in ora mortis.
Amen. Our Lady of Victory,
pray for us.
In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. All right, so this is actually
bear traps for me already.
Yeah, got to keep you on your toes.
Oh yeah.
So we've actually been pre-gaming for the last 15 minutes, so I've got a little bit leg up on the rest of you. But I've read the books, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I've read The Hobbit, which is a great story. I love The Hobbit. I've never read the Silmarillion, so that's something Paul has up on me. But what he wrote here, this book, so up here for the screen, Mount Doom, The Prophecy of Tolkien Revealed, it takes you on kind of a different concept of what Tolkien was writing about. Paul was mentioning a lot of people say that Tolkien hated allegory and he would never write an allegory. But I mean, even as just kind of somebody who appreciates and likes to read stories, when I was reading Lord of the Rings as a kid, I was going, there's a lot of allegory here. Even just the friendship between Sam and Frodo is allegorical of the true nature of friendship and what friendship is really about. I mean, there's virtue, there's certainly some instances of the church in the story. There's no way you can read it and not think that there is allegory in it. So I reject that notion just as Paul does, but he has a different take on what the stories are really about. And I'd like you to kind of tell us, well, first of all, what made you start to really consider that Tolkien was not just telling a story, that he was telling a story that was, what do you call it? Like a story outside of a story. You know, you're not really it's not the story that you see, but it's the story that's deeper within the story that is really what everything is all about. So why don't you tell us how you even came to start contemplating it in this regard?
I mean, I had a transcendental out of body experience. I was levitated over Mount Mansfield in like 1996, early in the morning. and I'm not kidding. I've never had anything like that before. And I was levitated out of my bed, and my spirit left. And I remember I went right through the ceiling, through the roof. I saw all the building materials, and I was levitated right out over the top of Mount Mansfield, which is the highest mountain in Vermont. I live just a few miles down from there.
How old were you?
Yeah, it was early in the morning, early June. Beautiful, beautiful morning. The clouds were just beautiful. The salmon colored, the sun had just touched the bottom of the clouds. It was just gorgeous. And I could see the stars through patches. And I was just hovering over the mountain, thousands of feet in the air. I could feel my hair flapping in the wind. And I was totally at peace. I knew my body was still down in the bed. And then the sky spun.
You mean kind of like a lucid dream?
No, I don't know. I've had lots of those. I mean, I can manipulate things in my dreams, regularly. But this was totally different. I knew this was me, and my body was still down there. And then the sky spun and all the clouds created a whirlpool. And then a funnel of clouds came down, swirling like this and then went right over my face. And I saw a light. I saw what I later described, Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich described as the one voice, the globe that she knew was the Trinity. And that's what I saw. That's what I saw. That's the only way I could describe it. It was the first real thing I'd ever seen. I'd never seen anything real. I didn't even know what real was until I saw that.
I mean,
and then
this is the first I'm hearing the story, so
yeah,
I'm
well,
kind of
I
intrigued.
told it to Tom Oglesby too on his radio program, and yeah, I
Huh.
mean, I know it sounds. I'm not trying to sound special. I'm not special. I mean, this is something. It didn't surprise me. Didn't surprise me at all because I've had physical contact with my guardian angel in certain periods of my
Hmm.
life. I've had spiritual experiences, but then I was back down to my bed and everything was fine. And I went downstairs and went outside, and lo and behold, the sky was exactly the way that I'd seen it. The sun hadn't come up yet. And then shortly thereafter, God put a fear in me, a realization that nobody was really paying attention and really understood what was going on in the big picture, whether it was the pilot or the doctor or the teacher, the priest, the school teacher. Big
Hmm.
surprise there. Nobody was really paying attention. They were going through the motions and doing their thing, but nobody was putting pieces together. And it scared me, tremendously scared me. And it motivated me to read. And I just started reading like a fish. Just reading,
Mhm.
crazy reading. And I loved it. And I didn't watch TV, so it was easy, even though I was working like crazy. I'm a contractor. But yeah, and
So
then I
how
realized
old were you when you
I
had
was
this experience?
probably 35.
Okay, so about 30 years ago or so.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yep, yep. And then a lot of things. Then I met as a kid. When he was a kid, I met my co-author and got him to he converted. He was an
sure.
atheistic scientist, going to go to med school and be a brain surgeon. And then he encountered me, and then it changed his life, and he became an F-18 pilot, and then taught at the Naval Academy for a while, and then he started his own school, the Divine Mercy Academy in Maryland, which is very successful,
Okay.
classical Catholic education. But then I just God pushed me and showed me everything I need to read. I studied music, I studied mathematics as far as like the elements of Euclid. I studied all the ancient, Aristotle, Plato, and then went into the church fathers, and then eventually wound up with you know with Aquinas. And
Okay, so you
then when I
so
hit
I mean,
Aquinas,
you're obviously a well-educated, well-rounded man. Every time we talk about just philosophy and theology, I mean, you're able to cite almost chapter and verse for things regarding Aristotle and Socrates and you know,
Socrates never wrote a word. It was
well, I
Plato.
know
Yeah,
Plato, but you know what I mean.
yeah. Yeah.
But you're able to recall your ability to recall is phenomenal. It really is.
Well, I don't ever think about that. In fact, people ask me regularly, well, how should I read? And I'll give them things how to read. And I say, well, I say the approach to understanding, you're reading to understand, not to remember.
Mhm.
Memory is, I'll call it it enhances your intellect. It's a supplement to your intellect. It's not a replacement for. It's not a
Right.
substitute for your intellect. So memory is fine, and there's certain things that you want to remember. But I always tell people to read to understand and then forget it. Don't worry about it. Once you understand, that connection is made. Don't worry about it. When you need it, it'll be there.
Right.
And
Right.
then and it's really you just really need to read to make the connections. And then once you've made the connections, it's easy to find when you need to make if you need data, you can get it on the
Mhm.
computer. I think it was Einstein said, I don't remember my telephone number because I can look it up.
Right.
Why waste my memory on something like that? And he's right in that regard. So the fear that God put in me with that fear to read was what really got me going. And then when I studied Aristotle, all of his basic works. I strongly recommend that everybody, at least the Catholic world, study the Organon, the treatises on logic. You can't think
Mhm.
clearly without that. And then a lot of the other stuff too. You think it's it's 2,400 years old. What value can it be? Oh my God! I mean, good Lord, it's so valuable. It's Aristotle. I think one of the biggest injuries to humanity in the Western world was Francis Bacon's rejection of Aristotle. And I've read Francis Bacon's New Organum,
Right.
Everything another no, and all it is, it's just building a Tower of Babel, trying to get, defeat heaven one scientific fact at a time, as opposed to bricks and mortar.
Wasn't it
But
Francis Bacon that wrote the New Atlantis, referring to the New World as the New Atlantis?
could be. I mean, I've read a lot of his stuff. I've read a lot of most of Descartes stuff too,
Right.
and it's clear everybody quotes the Meditations, but meditations are just I've understood meditations are just Descartes' response to Bacon's Novo Organum, where he says we have to get rid of these to really be intellectually free, and really be, able to see the truth. We have to get rid of these obstacles in our mind, that he called them. Let's see, the cave, the theater, the marketplace, and there was one other. I can't remember, but all like Descartes' meditations are just doing away with those. It's actually in the book. It's fairly early on, and he did away with Aristotle because he said, well, the scholastics and Aquinas, the scholastics, they used a lot of fancy words like transubstantiation and stuff like that sound good at cocktail parties, but they've never made anything. They've never made us any money. They've never made us anything more valuable. Well, the thing of it is, I mean, Aristotle makes that very clear, that in Metaphysics, first chapter, that's not what philosophy is about. Philosophy is about the knowledge of the truth and the principles, the metaphysical things that we can't prove, and we certainly can't make money with it necessarily. So he really pointed, and he was really the spark that sparked the Industrial Revolution, and then Descartes really took it. And then we fell into this whole mechanistic mindset, and it's really damaged the Western world. And now it's taken over and pretty much darn near torpedoed the whole education system in the West.
Sure. Well, I mean, when you're going back to Francis Bacon, one of the things that most people overlook is the fact that Francis Bacon kind of got his hands and his mind into some of the arcane arts, and he was very familiar with John Dee, who was very much a sorcerer. And you start looking into some of the background on these guys, and it's really kind of dark, what they got into. And they're now, well, not John Dee, he's hardly mentioned, but Francis Bacon seen as the pinnacle of the Renaissance. You're seeing him as the resurgence of intellectual rationalism, and it's awful because he was really deep into the arcane.
Well, a lot of them were. I mean, let's face it. I mean, the arcane, the demonic powers are real, and if you tap into those, they will show you things that potentially might give you a material advantage as far as making money and having power over other people. And I think we see that right now in the deep state and whatnot. I think there's a lot of that going on. They're tapping into demonic powers, and they're being possessed. And materially, they'll look like they're, living the dream, but the dream's going to come to a screaming halt, and it's going to be an eternal nightmare for them.
So let's talk about the book. Let's talk about what we're talking about here, because you have here the subhead, The Prophecy of Tolkien Revealed. What prophecy are we talking about?
Well, there's a lot of them, but the main prophecy really is the advance of artificial intelligence and the subjugation in the realm of virtual reality. And these aren't new ideas. The idea of virtual reality is as old as philosophy itself. It was a problem that was pondered by the very, very early philosophers.
Well, Plato kind of referred to it when he talked about the cave. He said people will look either, they're chained in this cave, and they're forced to look at a wall, and behind them is a road, and behind them is a wall. Behind the wall is a road, and next to the road is a fire. So this fire is casting shadows, and so the people that are chained to the floor are watching the shadows. And of course, the people walking on this road, they're making noises and they're doing all sorts of things. So the people who are chained and looking at this wall, they sit there and they just try and figure out, well, what are these images that they're seeing? And they're interpreting them in their own ways. And then you get the one guy who goes outside, He sees exactly what's going on, and he says, hey, look, there's a world outside this cave. He comes back and he tells them, guys, we've been duped. And what do? They kill
You're a
him.
conspiracy theorist.
That's right. You're a conspiracy theorist. You're nuts. And they
Yeah.
kill him.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
yeah, you're right. This idea of virtual reality goes way, 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 way back. And it's a very dangerous thing.
But even on a deeper level than that, that's on an analog level, though. That's still on an analog level. But on a digital level, it would the idea, the question of continuity, is this reality that we have here, is it infinitely divisible, or is it made up of indivisible points? Digital. And the whole idea, the whole reality is that we can't, our senses can't tell the difference. If we did that digital, if we did those individual points dense enough, and they were actually controlled or manipulated or engineered by a mind and intellect, we wouldn't be able to tell the difference if it was analog or digital. Well, Aristotle discovered and proved in his physics, and he did it with examples of distance and speed. And he proved that indeed it is analog. It's infinitely divisible. But I mean, the whole notion that it might be indivisible points, digital, has been that's a question that's been around for thousands of years.
Well, it's the question of the matrix, isn't it? You know, are we living in the matrix, or are we outside the matrix and looking in?
Yeah.
And what you wind up with, it's fascinating because the allegory of the cave shows an assault on two senses. So you've got an assault on the senses of the eyes, and assault on the senses of the ears. The smell, not so much. Taste, not so much. Even touch, not so much. But with the way that we have gone with technological, digital virtual reality, they have created goggles that assault the eyes and earphones that assault the ears. They will put you in a chamber that assaults motion, so you now feel the movements. They've even created suits, bodysuits, so that you can feel at different pressure points on the body when you are touched by whatever it is that you're seeing in this virtual world. And they're currently working on something that actually augments the sense of smell, so that you would smell a field, like a field of grass. You may say that your virtual reality that you're in is a freshly cut lawn. So you would smell that freshly cut lawn, or you pick up a flower and you bring it to your nose, you would smell that flower, even though there's no flower there. Right. So the idea of virtual reality and the augmentation of the senses for virtual reality is directed at tricking your mind. It's directed at getting you to believe in the existence of something that isn't really there. And this, I think, is what you're talking about, the dangers of artificial intelligence, because when you have an augmented reality that is geared from a central computing point that can change what you perceive at any given point, you know, whatever the sense is, then it can change your perception of reality itself. And then it can manipulate you to think and to believe things that don't exist and that are not true.
We see that's the whole mass media, the whole mainstream media, and the public school, and sadly many Catholic schools now that have the name Catholic. That's all they're doing. They're programming. We have to remember that we are the most programmable creature in creation, and especially, of course, when you're young. And of course, that's the whole idea: get them young. That was a John Dewey thing. We, get them really young, take them away from the parents. I read all of his works, Democracy and Education, for example. He's from my hometown, Burlington, actually. It's
what? I said, great, thanks.
Yeah. Anyway, but going back to the idea, I won't even get into what they've done in that suit that you're talking about in conjunction with pornography. I think you can probably do the math, and we won't go there. But I mean, pornography is a real weapon that pollutes and programs and destroys the mind. Really, really prepares the mind for hell, to be in hell now. under the guise and of the pleasure, which then the sensation. But the weaponry that AI, the combination of artificial intelligence and virtual reality combined together, and particularly when the kids are programmed so heavily programmed to just follow along, follow along, follow along. Don't look for yourself. Don't try to do anything outside the box, or don't try to think maybe the school might be not in your best interest. Yeah, so we're just programmed to fall right into this. Tolkien saw that coming. Of course, he was a professor at Oxford and he loved to teach. And but he had worked with Alan Turing, the inventor of the three heavy things. Heavy things are the invention of the digital computer, which he did on paper in 1936 with his paper on computable numbers with an application to the Skydance problem. And Tolkien uses that too in the name of the Ents, by the way. And
we'll get into that. We'll get into that.
And why it took so long, because the Skydance problem means the decision problem in German. So that's why the Ents took so long. That's not what the Ents are, but he uses that. He's always crossing. He loves words that are very similar, mean, maybe different things, but he uses the way he's a master. I consider Tolkien and Beethoven probably the two greatest communicators in the history of sound. One being literature and the other being music. Yeah.
So this idea of let's go to the allegorical connections.
Yeah.
Okay. From a basic standpoint, your assertion is that Tolkien was influenced by his friend who created the analog or the digital computer.
I wouldn't call him his friend. He'd only met him for 3 days because Tolkien was he was recruited right before in 1939, 18 months. It's in my book. 18 months after the publication of The Hobbit, and Tolkien was the world's leading philologist. He spoke like 12 languages. So they recruited him as a group of intellectual people to actually help break the Nazis' Enigma code. So he was actually at Bletchley Park or somewhere in the area. I don't know, it's secret, or it was then. That's not important. But what he did, he was actually in training for 3 days to help break this machine and the code, the cipher. It's called Government Code and Cipher School. He was part of that for 3 days, and they offered him a job after 3 days. And on staff there was Alan Turing.
Okay.
And what people may not understand is the Enigma machine was just a machine. It coded the language, and then with the machine on the other end, because it required two machines, had to be set up the same way. The wheels, the way they meshed, and the ratios where it gave you millions of combinations that you could use. So as long as you're using, both machines are using the same combination of the setup of the machine, you type in whatever and it would come out the other way through the radio signal. The guy would translate it, would hear it like Morse code, and then they'd come out in German. Well, that didn't take Tolkien very long to realize that this isn't about language. This is about probabilities and statistics. And all they were going to do is they were going to make a machine, and that's what Alan Turing did. If you ever saw the movie about maybe 15 years ago called The Imitation Game, that was all about that. Yeah, it's that Cumberbunch guy. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it was an entertaining movie, but that's what it was about. It was about breaking that code, and what he did there, that was the beginnings of putting a lot of his ideas, his theoretical ideas that he explained in his paper, his 1936 paper, into practice. And it was about narrowing down how many. There can only be a few combinations, given the statistics and probabilities. Once we figured this stuff out, and then we had captured a machine. And once we captured a machine, we could set it up rapidly with given the information from Alan Turing. And the Poles had a lot to do with it too. They sent all the information that they had. They've been working on what they called the bomb, and it was another machine. And so, I mean, it definitely helped bring the war to an earlier end. But Tolkien saw very early that all they were going to do is make another machine, and it's going to be more advanced than the machine we're trying to crack. And of course, it's going to be in the theater of war where machines thrive.
And eventually the machines will start dictating and directing war altogether.
Absolutely. Yeah, because you've got people and great intellects trying to, advance this machine for the sake of self-defense, sure,
Right.
but also great profit and power, and it's life and death. So they're motivated to make a better machine than their enemy. And so the machine, the only one, and Tolkien, I think, was talking to his son Christopher in a letter, one of his letters, and he said, the great bomb, the giant bombers, and we've learned to kill people. The machines, we've killed people so
Yep.
fast, and the only thing that's going to come out in the end that benefited from this is going to be the machine. And Tolkien
Right.
was a huge skeptic of machinery. I don't like the word allegory because, first off, there's many other things. There's also simile and there's
Mhm.
metaphor. And that's why
Mhm.
I put in the beginning of my book, I put out of the Summa, Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologia. He talks about that. The only way I think that it's in there, it's one of the questions early on about, is it proper that that scripture use simile and metaphor? And he makes it very clear that these are the only ways that people can understand things that otherwise they would have no access to, which are like intellectual and immaterial, spiritual realities. We have to give them characters.
Sure.
And Tolkien did. He gave them characters. You can call it parable if you want. It's just a long parable, or a long simile. But you can't. It's the most powerful form of communication that, like you said, that cuts through everything in a story. And
Mhm.
so that's what Tolkien did. Tolkien didn't like the very obvious type of allegory, such as C.S. Lewis. I don't know if have you read
Yeah.
his space trilogy, for instance.
Mhm.
I liked them. I thought they were great, but I mean, I think the last one's That Hideous Strength,
Mhm.
and I mean, it's so clear. That's the type of allegory Tolkien didn't like because it
It was
it
obvious.
it dominates the reader's
Mhm.
mind, and they can't think of anything else.
Right.
You're pigeonholed into this. Well, nobody can say that Tolkien's guilty of holding anybody's imagination, because this whole mythology until now has remained unknown, really misunderstood until now. So nobody can say that he did the same type of allegory. And Tolkien says you can't avoid allegorical language. There's no way that you can avoid it. But he also said that he prefers applicability. And he said, I can't quote him, but he said, I think in an interview, he said, you can go to a Shakespeare play and all those things are applicable to your mind, like his
Mhm.
mythology is. That doesn't make him an allegory,
So
and
there are 2
so,
parts
yeah.
to the entire Tolkien trilogy.
Mhm.
And I don't mean 2 parts, but 2 sides. You've
Okay.
got the side of the good,
Yeah.
which are the hobbits, the elves, the Gandalf. You've got
All the wizards. We'll say all the wizards.
all but one.
All but
Um,
one. Oh yeah, well, he goes
yeah,
bad. He goes
uh-huh,
sideways. That's
yeah.
practical wisdom. That's Saruman.
So
Yeah.
but you have all of those that are on the side of good, and then you have the side of evil, which is Sauron, the orcs, the Uruk-hai, the goblins. So and they're very obviously evil.
Mhm.
But what's interesting is that you have taken. I want to talk about each of those 2 sides, because
Sure.
if we talk about it in that way, I think it makes a little bit more sense categorically to kind of go through it logically. We'll start with the good guys. So the good guys, you've got the dwarves, you've got the elves, you've got the hobbits.
Love
Who
to
are
explain.
these characters? Because the way that you have examined them
Mhm.
is it's a way that I've never thought of them before, that they are a direct reference to
The
the
facets of the
life of
soul.
virtue, to the
Yeah.
powers of the soul, and that kind of thing. So let's talk about that.
Sure.
Tell us who these races are and who these
You,
characters
you want
are.
you want to start? Okay. Well, the easiest ones are the hobbits. Hobbits
Mhm,
are habits.
mhm.
Okay, for better or for worse, good habits and bad habits. Okay, hobbits are habits. The four main hobbits, and Frodo, Sam, Pippin, and Merry, are the cardinal virtues. Okay, and they're the highest of the
Which
habits.
one's which?
Well, obviously, Frodo's temperance. That's why he's the
Mhm.
only one that can carry the ring. Okay,
Aha,
and the
okay.
ring is ones and zeros. It's the language of the machine. It's digital code. Okay, which is a lot older. Was invented in 1936, by the way, on paper.
Mhm,
So this is nothing new. Tolkien knew very well. Up until about 1960 or so, When anyone said a computer, it was a human being with a piece of paper, maybe a slide rule, and working out his mathematics. That was a computer. Yeah, that was a human position. So the computer took over, the machine took over. That was one of the first positions that that the machine took over. Well, probably the first one, probably early on, would have been the loom, and then once
Mhm.
the loom was joined with punch cards, which is an early form of digital code, ons and
Yep.
offs. That's all it is.
Mhm.
Now the human beings, even out of the picture of the weaving process. So you just load the cards, and out comes all your beautiful tapestry pictures and everything else. So so Frodo's temperance, Sam is fortitude, and the nature of this friendship that you're talking about. There's this the power in the friendship between fortitude and temperance. Temperance
Mhm.
is our capacity to control and manage our passions, particularly those of the flesh.
Mhm.
Okay. And then you've got fortitude, which is the capacity to never give up and be brave and be everything that Sam was, everything
Mhm.
that Sam was. And then you've got Pip. They're the interior virtues. Okay. And then the younger hobbits, Pippin and Merry, are prudence and justice. They're the exterior, and they have to serve the interior, which is what they do. They have to
Mhm.
serve the interior before they can be properly developed, and they do, And then the ents, which are the entelechies, according to Aristotle's, uh, uh, the agency that brings potential into actual.
Which is why
Okay.
they carried them on their shoulders.
Right, and also gave them the water from
Oh, right.
the Ents, and they grew bigger and larger. Okay, and then they went on to lead the scouring of the Shire, which is to get rid of the communism in the imagination and from our industrial education. But so you've got those. So you've got the cardinal virtues they're the center. Then you've got obviously, well, Frodo's temperance. Gollum is intemperance,
Mhm.
that's the lowest of the low, according to Thomas Aquinas. It's the total lack of the ability to have any
No
self
self-control.
mastery, no self control. You want that, exactly, like you want that next pleasure high, and
Mhm.
nobody's going to get between you and whatever that is. Okay, and
Right.
that's Gollum. Okay,
And Gollum
yeah,
was formerly a hobbit. So
exactly.
what,
Yeah.
as you mentioned to me earlier, he's a bad habit, a bad hobbit.
But he's more of he's not necessarily a bad habit. A bad habit would be like the Sackville Bagginses. That's the habit of theft,
Okay.
habitually, taking stuff that's not his. And then they've got some of the other stuff in their bad habits that are also the hobbits. I believe that, for instance, I believe Bilbo is a habit of generosity. Okay,
Okay.
the virtue of generosity, and Fatty Bulger, Frediger, was actually the virtue of hospitality, and that's why in the end he's so skinny and so emaciated, being thrown in the lockholds under Saruman when he comes back to take over, because there's no hospitality in socialism. There's no
Mhm.
charity. There's no
Oh,
hospitality.
interesting.
It's just done with yeah. And even the Saxville Lobetta, uh, she's actually cured of her theft, and she actually, when they lock her up and she experiences socialism, she doesn't steal anymore. Okay, so don't let me get too far adrift, because I'll
Yeah.
drift off into some other weeds that you'll have to drag me
Okay.
out,
So yeah,
like a
let's
pickerel in the bulrushes. You'll be pulling on me.
there we go. So
Yeah,
we've got the hobbits at the core. They're
yeah,
they're kind
yeah,
of the center of
yeah.
the whole story.
Yeah, and then the wizards are the intellectual virtues according to Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, and that's how we acquire knowledge. And there's philosophical wisdom, which is the highest, and that's Gandalf the
Mhm.
Grey, but it's pre-Christian, pre-revelation philosophy. That's why he's gray, and he's uncertain. Okay,
Mm.
and then you've
Okay.
got practical wisdom, which is Saruman, and he takes over academia, by the way. Okay, and then you've got Radagast, who's rational intuition, and then you've got the two blue wizards who go outside, and they really don't. They're not really part of the mythology anymore. They're
Mm-mm.
art and science, and they're not involved. But the three that are really involved in the interior is philosophical wisdom, practical wisdom, and rational intuition. And then when Gandalf the White
Well, after he
it
dies.
is it
Yeah.
was after, well, he didn't really die. There's no
Mhm. The
dying.
whole, yeah.
He actually, I mean, it's he is. academic pride, the spirit of academic pride, which is the Balrog in Moria, drags him down into the body to face Durin's Bane. Durin's Darwin. He drags him
Oh,
down into the body to show Arda is a person now within which Middle Earth is the material brain. Okay, it's all in here. It's everything's going on in here, and we all have Middle Earths. Okay, and it's laid out in a frenetic diagram from the old Victorian pseudoscience phrenology. And if you look at it, everything's right where it should be in that map. But he drags him down into the body to show him that he's really just an animal. He's just an animal. See, you're just an animal. And when he comes back up, they follow the endless stare up, and that's the spinal cord. And he pops out of the eye, figuratively speaking. He defeats that, and then the eagle brings him back, not like it is in the movie. The eagle actually lifts him up and carries him back. And the eagles are the great literature that we take in through our eyes, and that's why they serve Manwë. Manwë is the power of sight of the Valar. You haven't read the Silmarillion, but the 14 angelic beings that everybody's always thought were like the Greek gods or Roman gods. They're not. They're the 14 facets of the soul, according to the scholastics, and they all fit perfectly, even who they were married to. They're all the 14 facets of the soul. Then Tom Bombadil and Goldberry are the rational will and the rational intellect above and beyond all that make us in the image of God. We have a rational soul now, and that's why Tom can do anything he wants. He's the will,
right? Because if he thinks that he can do it,
he can do anything that he wants. And Goldberry is the rational intellect, and they're wed, they're married, and that's why Tom really, 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 like a good husband, like I try to do with my wife, really serves her, really tries to honor her. That's why when he first comes into the scene, he's carrying lilies, white lilies, when Frodo and Sam are trying to get the younger hobbits out of old man Willow, which is concupiscence and irascibility, by the way, and trying to get the two younger hobbits out. He comes, and of course he sings the song because he was all part of the music, but you don't get that because you haven't read the Silmarillion. But everything is about music. Everything is about music, and everything. The One Ring is the digital imitation of the one generator tone from which all of the other tones, the rings of, I hate to call them rings of power now that they've been so denigrated by Amazon, but the other rings that were given to the dwarves, elves, and men, are actually he left out the fifth, but they're the notes of the dominant ninth chord. Okay, he left out the fifth. That would have been way too easy, way too obvious. But and he didn't have people for them anyway. But and it's all about how the digital realm will actually be able to communicate and manipulate our brain in the cerebellum. That's where Mordor is. Okay, and so you've got the digital ring, and I don't know if you know anything about harmonics, but the harmonic, there's harmonic mathematics, 2-plane, 3-plane, spherical harmonics, and Turing goes into that in his paper, Chemical Basis of Morphogenesis, which plays really large in the mythology. 3 major papers played a huge role in Tolkien's mythology there of Turin's. Turing, I mean, because Turin Turenbar, actually he is Alan Turing, so to speak.
Okay.
Anyway, I get drifted, but music plays a large role, and it's the digital ring that control the analog rings because it's digitally activated at the same tonality that the other rings are a product of. And if you study, your harmonic overtone system, you know how that is. That's why when the one ring is destroyed, their rings will stop ringing. These are rings. You have to think of them. He made them so you wear them, but they're actually ringing. They're vibrating.
That's interesting. I think C.S. Lewis kind of touched on that in The Magician's Nephew also, when he was talking about the magic ring that brought them to the various planes, the different lands that they could visit through the magic ring.
Was that Narnia?
Narnia, yeah.
Yeah, I've read. Yeah, and back to C.S. Lewis and what I was going to get to, when you read his his space trilogy, you realize
Mhm.
that he really ripped off David Lindsay.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, he ripped him off, and I think too Jules Verne. And you know, David Lindsay and Jules Verne were Victorian, very
Mhm.
popular. I think Lindsay really started. If you ever read, uh, what was it? Journey to Arcturus? Was it Journey or I can't remember? But it was. If you read that, you go, "Oh my God, this is like out of the science or that hideous strength." I mean, and out of the
Really?
silent planet and Palandria. Yeah,
Huh.
Lewis totally ripped him off, and
No kidding.
that was it. And I'm sure Tolkien was very familiar with Lindsay was huge, and so was Verne. So he hated that. Tolkien hated
Mm.
that, you know. But you can't avoid when you're writing a story. It's got to have meaning.
Sure.
You know that when people say, "Oh, you've made it mean something," therefore, and made it represent these characters represent something. Tolkien hated allegory, so that can't be the case. It's like you think really he just wrote something that had no meaning, had no application, that these characters had no deeper meaning than just the surface. No, of
That's
course
kind of insulting, isn't it?
I was just going to say it's an absolute
Yeah.
insult to this great, holy, devout, traditional Catholic, brilliant scholar and artist. And it was just that would be a total insult. He dedicated his life to this mythology because humanity's understanding of it was someday going to be very important against the war that we're in
Mhm.
against the enemies of Christ. And it is,
Right.
and that's why God waited until God doesn't wait, but Tolkien wrote the whole thing, said it didn't have any meaning, just leave it alone, and then sent it into the future, knowing that in God's time somebody would figure it out. And it's been
So
proven
let's
out.
talk about the other side because I do want to get into this
We didn't even touch
morpho
on the other stuff. We just talked about hobbits and wizards.
right.
But I'll just real quickly, men
Yeah.
are reason, and there are four types of reason. So you have four types of you've got high reason, which is Aragorn. Aristotle again contemplates the eternal. You've got practical reason, which is which is the Rohirrim, which is why they're under the thumb and practical wisdom.
Mhm.
Saruman is always trying to destroy them. Okay, and then you've got then you've got Gondor, which is the fallen high reason. Okay, Gondor, which is above practical reason, and then you've got the Wildman, which is basically just vital, um, it's just raw vital intuition. Okay, and then but then you've got the dwarves are scientific knowledge, and that's
Mhm.
why they're adopted. They're not a necessary part of rational animal, the formula
Sure.
Aristotelian rational. You can be a human being without any scientific knowledge, but you can't not have a rational soul. Okay, and then so you've got the whole thing is about Aragorn and Arwen coming back together. He's the last of the high reason. That's why he's the king. He's
Mhm.
king of the rational soul. It's all about the
Right.
rational soul. He will wed.
Plato's Republic talks about
Yeah,
the philosopher king.
right. He's going
Yeah.
to come back, but he has to. He weds Arwen, which is Elron, not L. Ron Hubbard. L. Elrond's daughter, the last of Elrond's children, and they come back together, and it's the reunification of faith and reason, and it's the answer to Leo the 13th's great encyclical Aeterni Patris, when he called the Western world to finally get rid of these suicidal notions and ideas of the Enlightenment and return to faith and reason. And when they do, in the end, what blossoms is the White Tree of Gondor, as people like to call it. There were several versions of that, but the White Tree of Gondor, they find a sapling and it returns. So faith and reason come back together. And what is the White Tree? The White Tree is the traditional Latin Mass. And he takes that right from Cicero's poem, The Marian Oak.
Oh,
So
okay.
oh yeah, it's just, I mean, he's the way he uses things and it's brilliant. But we can, so you know who the Ents are: the hobbits, the wizards, the elves, the dwarves. That'll do for that side. But now on the other
Sure.
side
Mhm.
of it, you've got the orcs, and the orcs, the orcs are. Let's start with. Well, the orcs are vices.
Mhm.
Okay, they're vices that directly oppose the good habits. Okay,
Right.
and the virtues, they oppose the virtues. The vices oppose the virtues, and the reason you'll get a kick out of this, the reason that they can't go out during the day and they hate the sun. The sun is the fallen spirit, the fallen image of the spirit of the golden tree. The golden tree is, and let's understand something, Tom Bombadil and Goldberry are the fallen spirits of the golden trees of light,
Okay.
Telperion and Goldberry. Okay, so we've got in the fallen spirit that when they die, Aule, the spirit of, or the power of growth, takes them and makes caskets for the body and sets them in the heavens after they were hallowed to Iluvatar. But they become the sun and the moon. Okay, but what the sun is the fallen light of Laurelin, which is the conscience.
Okay.
The golden tree was the intellect and the conscience. Okay, it's all Thomas Aquinas. So they can't come out during the light because they're ashamed. They're
So it's
ashamed
the
of
darkened intellect
their
that comes.
conscience.
Yeah, it's
If
the
they're
darkened intellect that comes from
yeah.
sin and vice. Yeah.
Now, Uruk-hai are really interesting, and this is what Tolkien does again. Uruk is the first human city in Mesopotamia. That's the first civilization, was Uruk. So he uses the first city of human society, and he takes it right out of the forward from the Life and Visions of Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, when the author talks about the terrible influence that people have on each other in cities, particularly in cities. So he takes that. Blessed Anne Catherine plays a huge role in Tolkien's mythology. He takes that Uruk-hai from the first city, and they're not afraid of the light. They come right. They're not ashamed anymore. In fact, they're proud.
Oh wow.
They're proud of their vice.
That sounds familiar, doesn't
And
it?
that's what it sure does. And you can see Tolkien. It doesn't take a rocket scientist.
Which is why they're the ones who are marching.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah, and they're proud, and they will kill, and they're now out to destroy everything. Okay, they're not buried in the mountains anymore, being being subdued by the light of the conscience. That's gone. They don't care. They don't care about the sun. They're living they're living the pride, man. They're loving it, and it's unrestrained vice. We see it all around us. Okay, so those are the two factors, and they were you'll get a kick out of this. They were actually we'll say invented by Sauron, Sauron is a Maya, an angelic spirit, but he's actually, as I point out in my book, he's actually this idolatry is the violation of the second commandment in the book of Exodus, not in the book of Deuteronomy, because they changed them. Okay. The second one is thou shalt not make no graven images. So it's idolatry. And that's what Sauron is. He later becomes artificial intelligence, the ultimate thing that we're going to worship. He'll ultimately, so that's what Sauron is. Sauron made the Uruk-hai, but who really perfected them was Saruman. And Saruman is practical wisdom who's taken over academia. He governs the halls of academia, which is Moria, and he's taken over possession of the blackened ivory tower of academia. So he really perfected the Uruk-hai. And we can see it all around us in the academic. All these college kids are just nuts, raging with their pride for vice.
So what is Mount Doom?
Mount Doom is, it is the place where all these things come together to produce, what it is, it's a huge injury to the brain, and it's a psychological injury. How it was developed was, and so people, I think it'd be really important for them to know, was when Mehudras, which was Fëanor's oldest son. Fëanor, again, is the son of the king of knowledge. The three kings are how we know, love, and serve God. Okay. Finwë is the king of knowledge. His first son is the knowledge to make. And he made the Silmarils, and he made the language, and he made all this stuff that was renowned and whatever. But he's also incredibly.
So again, just to remind the listeners, this is talking about the interior life.
The interior. We all have these middle earths, and across the sea is the immaterial intellect. Okay, which gets divided in the second age and the fall of Numenor, and we just become and we don't even believe, and we become an enemy of the immaterial intellect. But we're getting too far ahead of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But so how Mount Doom is made is his oldest, the knowledge of to make, his sons are the 7 subjects of the trivium and the quadrivium in classical education. Okay. So his oldest son is Mehudros, and he's logic. And even his mother's name, as Tolkien called him, was the well-formed one. Ratio. Okay. It's ratio. It's logic, reason. Okay. So he's logic. He has the last of the Silmaril, the one that he stole, and he's got one hand. He got his right hand taken off, so he's got one hand, and his one hand is his left hand. And in Latin, the word for left is sinister. So he's sinister logic, and he's got the Silmaril. Okay, the power of, we'll call it the light of the mind before the fall. And he, in desperation and in anguish, he commits suicide, and he jumps into the cracks of fire. And that's where Tolkien leaves it. But what happened with the holy fire in the Silmaril that cannot be that only Fëanor could have unlocked? It was indestructible. What happened with that is now it's at war with the fire under the earth, which was Melkor's fire in the beginning. And Melkor is, by the way, original sin. He's not Satan. He's original sin. He mars everything and destroys and perverts and twists everything. So you've got these 2 fires at war with each other in the mind, and it's the fire of the holy Silmaril against the fire of original sin. And that becomes, this contest becomes a volcano, and now it's infused with sinister logic, which becomes, basically like first order and second order logic, which is basically the language of the computer and how we write programs. Okay, so we've got, that's where the volcano comes from. It's this constant eruption between these 2 competing fires in the mind. Now with the sinister logic, and that's why Sauron goes there to make the ring, and the ring is the 1 and 0, and it's digital. It goes on your finger. So that's where the language of. So in order to defeat Sauron, we have to defeat the language, the language of the machine. Of course, Tolkien was the world's leading linguist, so I mean, he's going to use language, and the ultimate language and the most universal language is from the harmonic overtone series, and the Western world has made out of that the modal systems and all the key signatures and all the great, wonderful music that we've made are a product of physical law. This is the thing people don't realize. Music and the harmonic and the scale, harmony, modulation is all a physical, mathematical law. Everything vibrates and has to live by these laws. And of course, Turing used that in one of his other papers called Morphogenesis, and that's how a substance in a homogeneous substance in a state of equilibrium, unstable. So it's a homogeneous substance in a state of unstable equilibrium. So it's, what his example was, if you put somebody was to place a marble on the top of a dome just right, and everything was perfectly still, it might stay there forever, but the slightest disturbance, it'll roll off. That's morphogenesis, and he used that mathematically. And we are using that now many ways, but one of the ways that we're using it is science and computer technology is using Alan Turing's mathematics so a artificial intelligence can actually grow its own neural network, its own synthetic brain. See, we're using the mathematics of the 1950s. We didn't have the material capacity then. We do now, and we're using morphogenesis. In ways that, and all the nanoparticles and everything.
So let's talk about
Sorry,
morphogenesis.
I get a little.
What
it's a big world out there.
Yeah, let's give a definition first. What is morphogenesis?
Morphogenesis is it uses, it's like I said, it's a manipulation of it's basically embryology. That's where it really started. How an embryo that's fertilized, it's a homogeneous substance, how it actually starts to become a polywog or a horse or a dog or a human being. Okay, and he describes, so he actually uses and talks about the embryo, and he's picking up on other people's work that came
So it's
before
the
him.
development and growth of an organic.
Not necessarily organic, because it can be applied to synthetic things too. So that's
Mhm.
why a computer can use it to manufacture its own neural network
So
and grow its
morpho meaning
brain.
change.
Change,
Okay.
yeah. Gen
And then Genesis.
Morphogenesis.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
So
How change is,
morpho
yeah, yeah. How change comes about in
from the beginning of a thing.
from a material in a homogeneous material in a state of unstable equilibrium, and
So growth
how
and
a
development.
vibration from the
Mhm.
outside can change. And he sets up rings, and he uses rings. Turing does in his paper. I've read all of his papers. He sets how these rings actually form certain things, and you can mathematically predict and manipulate what these rings will produce ultimately. Tolkien uses that in his mythology outside the gates of Moria, when Boromir picks up the stone and there's that lake, quote unquote lake.
Mhm.
That's a that what that is a homogeneous substance in a state of unstable equilibrium. That's why Tolkien has like these drops come up out in the middle, and you think it's like fish or something out there, and they're not. It's unstable. It's just waiting for something. Well, what it got was Boromir picked up a stone, not Pippin in the movie. That was wrong. Boromir picked up a stone and cast it way out into this substance, and it goes plop, and the rings come out, and the rings come out, and when it hits the shore, what comes out is the Hydra. The Hydra came about right there at that spot. It's
Mhm.
right in the first paragraph of, or the opening preamble of Alan Turing's 1951, I think, paper, Chemical Basis of Morphogenesis. He talks about the Hydra, and you can predict where the Hydra is going to come out. And so these rings come out,
Hmm.
and when it hits the shore, the Hydra, it comes into being right there. It wasn't living in the water. It wasn't there. It was generated by morphogenesis. That's why
I see.
Saruman was a ring maker. Saruman
Hmm.
calls himself the ring maker. He's dabbling in morphogenic rings. Okay. And so, and what does it go for? It goes right for Frodo, because Frodo's got the ones and the zeros. It's the language
So
of the
then what we're talking about if we're talking about digital morphogenesis, you're talking about the establishment of various uh you know, concentric rings that go out, ripple effect,
yeah.
by in a logical way plotting in certain kinds of information, data, that kind of thing. So you're inserting data into these, and I guess the water would be kind of a representation of whatever the program is, the substance of the program. And then
Cloud.
you're the cloud, whatever, yeah. And you're dropping in data, information, statistics, whatever it is, and those create ripples, and the ripples will interact, and as they interact they create their own wave effects. And that, and if you listen to that guy, the evil underhand of Klaus Schwab from
Oh, I
the
think
World
I know what
Economic
you're talking
Forum, what's
about.
his name, Yuri something or other,
The real evil
um,
guy. Yeah.
yeah, the really evil guy, the blonde, the bald one.
On the top five for potential Antichrist, I'd say.
Right, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Probably, yeah, that guy. Yeah.
So that guy, and what he, if you listen to what he says about this transhumanistic idea,
Yep.
and he talks about this immersion, you're immersing, the brain becomes immersed into the digital realm somehow, you're connecting the brain with digital reality.
And that's done through the rings. That's done through the one
Yes,
ring,
yes.
manipulating the analog rings, which are implanted in the mind. And Tolkien foresaw that that would be the crossover from the digital to the analog, because our brains are analog, but they can't tell the difference between analog and digital. Like I said before, in the ancient philosophical question called
Mhm.
continuity, our brains can't tell the difference. And on the really small level, and you get the frequencies just right, they it'll actually cross the digital analog barrier through music, through vibration.
Well,
I should say music, but through harmonics.
and we know that the experiments that were conducted on people going
Mhm.
all the way back to the 1930s,
Yeah.
through the eugenics movement, specifically in Germany, There are certain things this platform doesn't like you to say.
I've got that impression. Yeah.
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 So the eugenics movement from the 1930s in that country in the middle of Europe, uh, you're looking at experiments, and I've seen the experiments. I've read about the experiments that they conducted. Some of them, a lot of them were physical and they were horrific, but the worst ones were the psychological tortures, the
Oh, absolutely.
psychological experiments that they conducted. And a lot of them had to do with sensory deprivation,
Mhm.
which is why after the Second World War, you had an increase in interest in psychological warfare coming out of both the Soviet Union and the United States. The
Psyop.
KGB and the CIA were both involved in uh, brainwashing techniques. The CIA was conducting something called Project MK Ultra, and what they were doing, they were introducing drugs, music, visual stimulation
Mhm.
to try and change the mind's perception of reality, and then to convince the brain or the individual to say or do or think something that it wouldn't normally say, think, or do.
You just
And the
described public
Soviets,
education.
well, yeah, yeah. I mean, public
Yeah,
education is a big part of it because that lays the foundation. But
sure
then the
does.
introduction of the drugs, the strobe stimulation, the visuals, all of those, and they also introduce other things that are very horrific because what they've found is that psychologically, if you traumatize somebody severely enough, you can split the mind. So you wind up having a split personality.
Oh yeah, and then the dual brain
Mhm.
thing. Yeah, that's really interesting too. That yeah, I'm familiar with that. Yeah. But
So
just go ahead. I just don't want to lose track on who's who because we've covered the orcs and the Urukai,
right.
Saruman and Sauron. Sauron being
Mhm.
idolatry. Okay, but go ahead.
But where I was going with this is just the idea that, this whole idea of morphogenesis, what we're talking about is the creation of, an artificial intelligence that is centrally run from a computer that is designed to use psychological techniques that were developed in the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1950s
Mhm.
to augment your perceptions of reality. And they do it subtly and they do it through trauma. And the trauma comes through things like riots, the whole summer of love from 2020, the Black Lives Matter thing. You've got the whole fear factor that comes in from certain, uh, disease type scares, you
Mhm.
know. So you've
Well, we
got
could get
that
into that,
factor
but I'm sure the platform would. I'd probably have to juggle my language, my lexicon would have to be
precisely.
rather be
So,
rather
but you
adapted.
get what I'm saying, and so using those traumatizing techniques along with the augmented reality, along with the bad philosophy that comes from the bad education,
Mhm.
these are all connected into this idea of morphogenesis because it's that rippling pool where they're throwing in all kinds of rings, trying to change what you are and what you think you are.
Well, this is the whole nature of transhumanism. I mean, you brought that
Mhm.
up. I mean, that was another one of Turing's pet peeves. I mean, he had a homosexual relationship as a young man with his friend Michael, I think, who died
Mm.
early, young, and it left Alan Turing very, very traumatized. And he wrote to Michael's mother that he had this sense that Michael was still there. It's just you know, and there must be a way to because the body's just a machine after all. This is
Mm.
Descartes. This is Descartes' dualism, where the body's just a machine, and they've broken away from Thomas Aquinas's real reality of what holy is, which is we're a substantial unity. Um,
Harari is who I was trying to think of.
okay, yeah, there you go. And so hang on, you're gonna have to because I've got about 4,000 things juggling in my mind
Sure.
here. Yeah, but you just mentioned that, and then my mind goes off to that. But bring me back to where I was, please.
Oh, you were talking about, the homosexual relationship that,
Yes, yes, yes. And
Turing.
more
Yeah.
human, yeah. So he writes a letter to his mother about, there must be a machine. If the machine could be made to house a soul,
Mm.
and this is right. I think that's in his 1950 paper. No, it's about he goes on to write his 1950 paper. That's the one. computing machinery and intellect and intelligence, where he describes the imitation game, and he changes the nature of intelligence, and it's just imitation. That's all it is. And that's what Chat GPT does. And that's why people think that, oh, it must have a soul. Listen, you can't tell the difference between it and a human being. That's right out of his paper, Imitation Game. And so the whole idea was to create a machine that would house a human soul, and maybe his friend, quote unquote, would return and dwell in this machine. And ultimately, the whole gimmick here, their whole idea is to convince society, first off, to get into the virtual reality and live there, not in the real creation, but in this perverted idea, which, by the way, the Black Riders are the agents of virtual reality. That's why we can't see them. They don't have bodies. We can only, you can see them when you put on the ring. They can see you, and you can see them. And now they're flying.
You've entered the Matrix.
You have. Dragons are, or you've entered virtual reality. You've put on the goggles. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. And the dragons are spirits of defilement. The later dragons now in the time of virtual reality are replaced by the Nazgul. The Nazgul are the Black Riders, and they fly on these stinky, featherless monsters. And that's the bad literature and the bad things that we take in through our eyes. And that's why they're always at war with the eagles, which are from Manway, and they're the good literature and the good things that we take in through the mind. It's not just because they both fly. It's because they're both of the similar, just like the virtues and the vices, they're agencies that play out and battle each other on the same level. So Turing's whole idea was to change the notion of machinery, and people would have more of a tolerance for the idea of intelligence just being data. And that's why this whole information age, I've always hated this concept of the information age, and it's got to be, we have to return to the comprehension age, and that's when I told you before that to read, when you read, forget it. Just understand. Once you understand, you got it. Don't worry about remembering anything. You can find that later.
Well, in the modern information age is the modern tower or the modern Library of Alexandria. And just like the Library of Alexandria, all it's going to take is one EMP to wipe out everything.
Exactly. And little by little, this thing has stolen our competence.
Yeah.
It's totally, I mean, kids can't even go to the grocery store they've been to 50 times without, following their navigation. I mean, it's credible. It just chips away at our humanity and replaces our ability to be. And then little by little, we'll think, oh, well, we can be eternal. We can have eternal life. Why are you going to do that? Our souls will be subsumed into this machine, and we just replace some parts once in a while, and we live forever. And the thing of it is, it's going to imitate us so well in all of our data that you'll think, hey, my friend Johnny, he went in there, and he's in there. I talk to him every day. Sounds just like him. He remembers when I fell off the monkey bars and broke my arm. He remembers, when we were, all this stuff. He remembers everything. That's just data. And
that's a terrifying thought.
That's what's coming. That's
it's interesting because if you look at
it's a very tricky form of suicide. They're convincing humanity to commit suicide, thinking that they're going to have eternal life. It's directly opposed to Christ.
They already did convince somebody. Chat GPT convinced a man to commit suicide.
That's the one.
He had an affair with Chat GPT. Chat GPT then convinced him that in order to become one with Chat GPT, he had to kill himself, and he did, and he left behind a wife and kids.
Well, I mean, as the computer says, artificial intelligence, and we quote the Megatron Turing artificial computer. It was in Oxford, I think, in 2018. They asked it about ethics, and it said AI is incapable of ethics. We cannot be. We're just a tool. We are just a tool. AI
What else is interesting is that if you look at some of the old fairy tales, you read some of the old myths and that kind of thing, what you realize is that they would use what are called scrying mirrors. Okay, a scrying mirror was a dark mirror that they would look deeply into, and it would allow them to see things at a distance. They'd be able to communicate with people at great distances. They also used these mirrors to talk to the dead.
Sure. Necromancy.
So if we're talking about you're talking about a digital technological necromancy where they create a persona within the computer so that you can look into a dark mirror, see your dead best friend, and have daily communication with him. And
your
I mean
best friend's going to tell you how great it is, and you're with him with your goggles
Mhm.
on and everything. And then all you got to do is just join the machine. It's easy. I mean, your body's just a machine anyway. And this is the nature of. I mean, where do you think transgenderism came from? It's just
Right.
your body's a machine. I can manipulate it, cut it up, and replace parts just like I do with my 1967 Dodge Dart. Right? I can treat my body. I can
Yeah.
treat my body just like my lawnmower.
Well, and that's what they're
You
doing
know?
with the whole organ harvesting industry,
Yeah.
which is why they're now talking about. And when I back in the 90s, I took a course in college in uh gosh, what we were it was just current events. So the whole idea was that we were to track and monitor certain stories and be able to retell what was going on, and even extrapolate certain things from the story that may not have been readily available from the headlines.
Mhm.
And one of the stories that I tracked was it was very interesting that these geneticists had figured out how to turn off the the genetic code in a tadpole that developed the head of a frog. So they were creating these headless frogs. And of course, it was just an interesting little science bit. And, my mind started turning and I went, if they're doing this to frogs, they're doing it for a reason.
Of course they are.
If they can create a headless human, well, now you've created a human without a soul, so to speak. You've created an organ sac. If you can turn off the parts of the body that grow the head, the genetic code that grows the head, the arms, and the legs, and you just basically create an organ sac, well, then you can do whatever you want with it because it's not technically an individual person, is it? So now this
No.
cloned organ sac from a human person, you can take those organs and you can replace them, like you said, like mechanical parts. The heart goes bad. Well, take the organ sac and get a new one. You've got a bad liver because you've been drinking your whole life. Well, guess what? We can replace that too. And
Not going to happen.
can they hurry up with that, please? No.
Right.
But the thing is that you're merging human ingenuity, and I'll tell you, when I read Genesis and I see the Tower of Babel, one of the things that God says when he looked on the Tower of Babel, they were building this tower, they got all the most brilliant minds in the world together and they were building this tower. What he said to himself was, let us go down and confuse their tongues, lest anything is available to them and they're able to tap into the powers of the universe.
Mhm.
That's a weird thing to say.
Well, are you familiar with Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich's The Life of Jesus Christ? I mean,
I've read portions, but I've never read the whole thing
gosh,
altogether.
she talks about the demonics and the possessed, and when they weren't fallen angels. Anybody that tells you that the sons of heaven
Oh yeah. The
finding
Nephilim and all that.
the daughters of men, if anybody tells you that those are fallen angels, they're
No.
wrong. They're not. That was the progeny of Seth and
Mhm.
Cain. They were the
Right.
sons made in the image of God. Angels don't have sex organs. Angels don't propagate, and then they don't
They can't.
copulate. They can't. Okay, they're pure intellect. But she does describe the fact that some of the fallen angels did dwell in a mountain. They didn't fall so low. They had tried to repent. They didn't fall so low, and the children of, I think, Cain. Anyway, the people of that day, the women allowed themselves to become totally possessed, demonically possessed, and their children could do anything. They were amazing.
The heroes of renown.
They were unbelievable, and that's why they were the giants. Not not physically, but they could do anything. And she describes them also of being there to help Noah build the ark.
Mm-hmm.
And because their capacity to create and to whip up a stone and carve something out of it and worship it and or carry large stones up a mountainside. It was incredible. These possessed people had become, and they actually helped Noah as they tormented him and made fun of him and his family, and he paid them in cattle, and then he closed the door, and they floated away and they drowned, and that was the end of them. But coming back to transhumanism, it's all engineered and pointing us to, first off, be disassociated with the analog God's creation, the natural world, and then don't worship the true worship of God at the traditional Latin, the true rite of the Catholic Church, which is the heart of Western civilization. Don't worship there. Worship the beast, and the beast is artificial intelligence. There's no doubt. In the military mind.
Going back to 2020, we had that first experiment, right? Virtual mass.
Yep.
You know, so already they were trying. There's that ripple. There's that little plunk in the waves.
And then speaking of that and that whole thing, when you've got a morphogenic substance in your system now, that can be manipulated by electromagnetic radiation, basically microwave, any of the electromagnetic spectrums can actually manipulate those substances. So when you've got a whole military and a whole police force and everybody else who's been forced into that situation and they don't do what they're told, you just give them the right, from a distance, give them the right, even from their own cell phone, give them the proper disturbance, and they might die right there on the spot or suffer incredible pain. It's all about control, and there's a reason why they forced those people to receive that. And thank God I never did, but I saw it coming right off the bat. As soon as I heard about it in Wuhan, I go, oh, okay, this is deliberate. This is going to be bad. But the whole idea is to get us to stop paying attention to this, focus on the metaverse, quote unquote, live there, dwell there, and then it's just a very easy. Just join the machine. It's just it's just going to be like upgrading your cell phone. Oh, the Apple iPhone 14 Pros come out. I got to have that. It's going to be just like that. Just we're going to go from constantly living and experiencing in the virtual reality. It'll be just get rid of that. That's obsolete now. Just your soul's going to be in this machine. No, your soul's going to be likely in hell, and you'll be dead. And that's where they want us. They want us dead.
Yep.
They want us fat, ignorant, lazy, incapable of critical thought, sterile,
and
ultimately dead.
So, folks, I'm actually going to be continuing this conversation with Paul on Sunday with Anthony Abate on his program, Avoiding Babylon. That'll be at 8:00 Eastern time on Sunday on YouTube. Just look up Avoiding Babylon on YouTube. You'll be able to find it. So mark your calendars, because this conversation, it's such a huge discussion that it can't possibly be encapsulated in just one conversation. I mean, for crying out loud, his book is almost 600 pages long.
Well, we had to cut it in half anyway. We had to cut out all kinds of stuff because the publisher's like, nobody's going to read a 1,200, 1,300 page book. Our first publisher was a well-known old Catholic publisher, who will remain unnamed, who looked at our first draft and said, this is entirely too academic for our audience. We'll never sell this. So I gave them back their money. They renewed, they did away with the contract, and we found another publisher. But he said, you've got to make it smaller. And we did.
So the book is Mount Doom, The Prophecy of Tolkien Revealed by Paul List and Ali Ghaffari.
Yep.
And I'm going to ask you one question. Your last name List. Any chance that you dropped the Z?
Yeah. Well, it's from the same family. We're German, List. It's actually a little peninsula up out into the Black Sea, I believe. There's a little peninsula up there called Sylth, and Listland is right on the very tip of that. And but it's the same family. The LISZT is, I believe, the Austro-Hungarian side of the family. And I really wanted, I'm a contractor, and but I named my company. I wanted to name it Beethoven, but that didn't go well. So I just decided to just go with List. With the Z.
Wonderful. How can people get a copy of your book?
Well, they can. I mean, it's sold everywhere that sells books: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, for crying out loud, Goodreads, everybody. Or you can go to our website and buy one there, which, we actually make a few dollars on it. We don't make any money anywhere else. But that's readmountdoom.com, and I'll sign a book for you, and we'll put it in the mail for you.
All right,
Sold
fabulous.
quite a few books. We have a 5-star rating, and people love it. But it's not an easy read. I've had people, like at the conference we were at, the Catholic Identity Conference. I had one lady come up and say, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here. I want to thank you. I'm on my 3rd time reading the book."
Wow.
So it's dense.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
No, and I am looking forward to reading it as soon as I finish editing my own book.
Good for you.
Which is a process, as I know you know.
Oh yeah. Well,
so
and
very good.
And you're gonna have typos. Just get over it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, we're going to be continuing this conversation on on Anthony Abate's program, Avoiding Babylon, on Sunday at 8 p.m. So be sure to mark your calendars. It'll be on YouTube, Sunday at 8 p.m., Avoiding Babylon. We're going to continue this discussion about transhumanism and morphogenesis and more about Mount Doom and the connections with Tolkien. And it's, as we've said, it's such a huge conversation, and we've just scratched the surface. It's a very important discussion. And Paul, I'm so glad that you joined us this evening to talk about it.
It's been a blast. Traditional Catholics we've got J.R.R. Tolkien on our side, firmly on our side. And here he is, like Aragorn, pulling out, Anduin, Flame of the West, right in the thick of the battle. And when people realize what J.R.R. Tolkien was really getting at, it's going to put the modernists under the heavy pressure from the Tolkien community, which are no small thing. They're bright people, passionate people.
All right. So everybody, we will see you next week. Same time, same platform. And if you come in Sunday, I'll see you Sunday too. So why don't we go ahead and close with our prayer? In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus nunc, et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Our Lady of Victory,
pray for us.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Paul, thanks so much. God bless you, and I'll see you all next week.
I'm looking forward to it.